In the heart of the black swamp, where the moon's silver gaze curdled into the fetid breath of decay, a single lotus bloom unfurled its petals against the poison tide, a fragile defiance whispered by forgotten gods. Mireia Valén had always known the swamp's hunger. Born under a blood moon that stained the reeds crimson, she entered the world marked as barren, her cries muffled by the elders' grim decree. Useless Omega, they branded her, the words searing like acid into her skin, a tattoo of thorns curling around her wrist like the vines that choked the council's ancient oaks. In the Pantano Negro, fertility was the throne's true currency, the pulse of power that bound alphas to their packs and omegas to their fates. Mireia, with her quiet hands and eyes like shadowed pools, had learned to survive on the fringes, gathering herbs that bloomed in the rot, brewing salves from the marrow of drowned trees, tending to the wounded without claim or complaint. The air hung heavy that night, thick with the stench of sulfur and stagnant water, the kind that seeped into your bones and whispered of surrender. Mist coiled like serpents around the council's stone platform, elevated above the mire on pillars slick with moss. Torches sputtered along the edges, their flames guttering in the humid wind, casting elongated shadows that danced like accusing specters. The pack gathered below, alphas with jaws set like iron, betas murmuring prayers to the moon goddess, omegas clutching their young as if the darkness might swallow them whole. Mireia stood at the platform's center, her bare feet sinking into the cold, crumbling stone, the rough weave of her gray shift clinging to her skin from the perpetual damp. She had been accused at dawn, dragged from her healer's hut by the council's enforcers. "You contaminate our bloodline," Elder Thorn had snarled, his voice a rasp like breaking reeds. Whispers of her curse, the barren womb that repelled the sacred rites, had festered into outright treason. A beta's fevered child had died under her care, they claimed, poisoned by her touch, though Mireia knew it was the swamp's blight, the creeping rot that no salve could fully banish. But truth held no sway in the Pantano Negro. Power demanded sacrifice, and she was the offering. The High Alpha, Lord Garrick, stepped forward, his frame towering, fur-trimmed cloak heavy with the scent of musk and authority. His eyes, cold as the undercurrent, fixed on her. "The goddess demands purity," he intoned, raising the ritual chalice, its surface etched with lunar crescents now dulled by years of use. For the clan's strength, the Barren must feed the river. The crowd's huevos rose, a low, throaty chorus that vibrated through the mist, echoing off the twisted cypresses. Mireia's heart pounded, a wild drum against her ribs, but she lifted her chin, tasting salt on her lips from unshed tears. What was strength, if not enduring the lie they forced upon her? She had mended fractures in the pack's hidden fractures for years, her empathy a quiet fire no one acknowledged. Now it would drown with her. They bound her wrists with vines slick from the bog, the fibers biting into her tattoo like vengeful roots. Elderthorn gripped her arm, his fingers bruising, and propelled her toward the edge. The river of rot churned below, a black vein pulsing through the swamp's heart, waters said to dissolve flesh and memory alike, a divine purge for the unworthy. Bubbles burst on its surface, releasing fumes that burned the eyes and clawed the throat. Mireia's breath came shallow, the cold seeping up from the stone, mirroring the chill that had settled in her soul long ago. She thought of the lotus she had once found blooming in a poisoned pool, its roots delving into death to draw life. Was that her? A fool's hope in a world that devoured the fragile? As they hurled her forward, time fractured. The world tilted, the torchlight blurring into streaks of orange against the endless gray. She plummeted, the air rushing past like a lover's desperate grasp, her body slicing into the river's embrace. The water hit like 1,000 needles, icy, viscous, tasting of earth and oblivion as it flooded her mouth. It wrapped around her, pulling her under, the darkness absolute, pressing against her chest until her lungs screamed for mercy. Visions flickered. Her mother's gentle hands weaving spells in the moonlight. The first heal she performed on a wounded pup. The loneliness that had become her shadow. The river clawed at her skin, dissolving the edges of her resolve, whispering that she had always been nothing. But then, a hand. Strong, unyielding, breaking the surface like a blade through silk. Fingers locked around her wrist, hauling her upward against the current's merciless drag. Mireia gasped, choking on the foul tide, her eyes stinging open to a blur of motion. A man emerged beside her, his form cutting through the black like a storm's fury. Dark hair plastered to a face etched with determination, eyes burning with an inner fire that pierced the gloom. He was no council drone. His build spoke of restrained power, cloaked in traveler's rags that belied the alpha scent rolling off him, sharp and commanding, laced with pine and distant thunder. "Who?" she rasped, but the words dissolved as he pulled her to the shallows, their bodies collapsing onto the mud-slick bank. The river. It shifted. Where her skin met his touch, the water around them lightened, the inky blackness receding like a veil torn by dawn. Ripples spread, carrying flecks of clarity, the rot's grip loosening as if commanded. Gasps echoed from the platform above, horror, disbelief, as the chalice slipped from Elderthorn's grasp, shattering on the stone. The man, Kyle, though she did not yet know his name, held her gaze, his breath ragged, a flicker of something profound crossing his features. Guilt? Recognition? In that instant, amid the swirling mist and the moon's watchful eye, Mireia felt the first stir of an ancient pull, a thread weaving through the decay. The river, once her grave, now mirrored the stars above, clear, alive, bearing witness to a destiny neither could deny. The mud clung to Mireia's skin like a second shame, cold and unyielding, as she lay gasping on the riverbank. The air tasted of upheaval now, sulfur yielding to a faint, unexpected freshness, like rain-scoured earth after a storm. Her lungs burned. Each breath a ragged theft from the night, but the water's venom had ebbed where his hand had touched her. She stared at the stranger, this alpha whose scent wrapped around her like smoke from a hidden pyre, pine resin sharp as a blade, undercut by something deeper, a metallic tang of old wounds and restrained fury. His eyes, storm gray under lashes beaded with river droplets, held hers without mercy, searching as if she were a riddle carved in the stars. He released her wrist slowly, the warmth of his palm lingering like an unwelcome echo on her branded skin. The tattoo of thorns pulsed faintly, a reminder of the council's verdict, but for the first time, it did not ache alone. You pulled me out," she whispered, her voice fracturing like thin ice. Fear coiled in her gut, not of him, but of the impossibility blooming between them. An alpha risking the river's curse for a worthless omega? It reeked of folly, or worse, a trap woven by the goddess's cruel jests. Cale Draven, for that was his shadowed truth, though he wore the guise of a wandering scout, shifted, wincing as he pushed himself upright. His cloak, sodden and torn, revealed the glint of a concealed blade at his belt, its hilt etched with royal crescents, dulled by travel's grime. He had come to the black swamp in disguise, driven by whispers of rot deeper than the waters, the council's embezzlement of sacred tithes, their rituals twisted to hoard power while the pack starved. Guilt had been his constant shadow since ascending the throne, a crown heavy with the ghosts of decisions that saved kingdoms but shattered lives. Saving her? It was impulse, born of the injustice scorching his veins as he watched from the mist-shrouded tree line. Yet now, with the river's unnatural clarity rippling behind them, he felt the pull, a primal thread, instinctive as the moon's tide on blood. The crowd's uivos shattered the fragile hush, rising from the platform like a beast roused from slumber. Torches flared brighter, their flames leaping shadows across the cypress knees that jutted from the mire like accusing fingers. "Treachery!" Elder Thorn bellowed, his voice cracking through the fog, laced with the panic of exposed lies. Lord Garrick's roar followed, commanding enforcers to descend, their boots splashing into the shallows as chains rattled like the bones of the damned. Mireia scrambled back, her shift tearing on a root, the chill seeping deeper into her bones. Curiosity warred with terror. This alpha's presence was a storm she hadn't summoned, his gaze stripping her bare in ways the river never could. "Why?" she demanded, her words half accusation, half plea, as she pressed a hand to the muddied earth for balance. The ground beneath her fingers softened, the rot receding in faint tendrils, as if her touch echoed the river's miracle. She yanked her hand away, heart slamming. No, it was him, their union that had stirred it. Denied, rationalized, he was just a foolhardy traveler, caught in the council's web like her. Kyle's jaw tightened, a flicker of melancholy crossing his features, etched by years of solitary hunts through blighted lands. "Because the rot claims enough innocence," he murmured, low enough that only she could hear, his voice a gravel-worn rumble that vibrated through the mist. He extended a hand again, not to claim, but to urge, instinct guiding him, though duty screamed to vanish into the night. The connection hummed between them, unspoken, her empathy sensing the fractures in his aura, the guilt that mirrored her own quiet shame. But he pulled back, eyes hardening. "Run, Omega, before they drag us both under." She hesitated, the wind whispering through the reeds like a lover's warning, carrying the distant howl of hounds loosed from the council's pens. Fear rooted her, but curiosity ignited a spark. What if this was no accident? The moon hung low, its silver light fracturing on the now clear river, illuminating the lotus petal that had clung to her hair, unmarred by the poison. It symbolized something ancient, a purity the swamp had tried to drown. Mireia met his gaze, the denial cracking like the chalice above. "I don't even know your name," she said, voice steadying, though her pulse betrayed the instinctive draw, pulling her toward him like gravity's secret law. "Kyle," he replied, the word clipped, as if admitting it unbound a chain. No titles, no throne, just a man marked by the weight of unseen crowns. He scanned the encroaching shadows, the enforcers' lanterns bobbing closer, their calls a guttural chant of retribution. The air thickened with the scent of pursuit, wet fur, iron resolve, the faint copper of impending blood. Mireia's breath caught. In his eyes, she saw not salvation, but a shared exile, born of the same corrupt tide. They bolted together, instinct overriding denial, her hand brushing his as they plunged into the tangled undergrowth. Thorns snagged at their clothes, the swamp's breath hot and fetid against their flight, but where they passed, the blight hesitated. A subtle shift, the vines parting as if in reverence. Mireia's mind reeled, rationalizing the impossible. It was the adrenaline, the moon's trick. Yet the curiosity deepened, a quiet fire amid the fear, drawing her deeper into his orbit. Behind them, the river sang its new clarity to the night, a testament to the touch that had defied death. The moon watched, impassive, as two souls, broken by guilt and rejection, fled into the heart of the rot, their paths entwined by a destiny that whispered of redemption, not reward. And now, I invite you to leave a trace of your presence in the comments. Tell us where in the world you're watching from, and the exact hour you hear this story. We wish to know how far these northern confessions travel, and at what moments of the night they find you. The undergrowth clawed at Mireia's legs like the fingers of the damned, each step a negotiation with the swamp's vengeful heart. Thorns tore at her shift, drawing thin lines of blood that mingled with the mud, but the pain was distant, overshadowed by the thunder of pursuit echoing through the mist. Kyle moved ahead, his form a shadowed anchor in the gloom, parting the vines with a hunter's precision that spoke of battles fought in silences deeper than this rot. She followed, her breath sinking to his rhythm, an instinctive harmony she dared not name. Fear had birthed this flight, but curiosity wove through it now, threading questions into the night. Who was he, this alpha who dove into death for a stranger? And why did the air around them feel less poisoned, as if his presence exhaled the blight from her lungs? They burst into a hollowed cypress, its trunk a cavern of splintered wood and hanging moss, the roots arching overhead like the ribs of some ancient beast. Kyle pressed her against the bark, his body a barrier between her and the encroaching lanterns. The scent of him enveloped her, pine sharpened by exertion, the faint iron of his own scratches mingling with the swamp's decay. Close enough to feel the heat radiating from his skin, Mireya's pulse stuttered, her empathy unfurling like a fern in moonlight, sensing the fractures beneath his resolve. Guilt, vast as the river they had escaped, etched in the tense line of his shoulders. He was no mere scout. That much her instincts screamed, but denial wrapped around the thought, rationalizing him as a wanderer ensnared by the same storm. "Quiet," he murmured, his breath ghosting her ear, sending an unwelcome shiver down her spine. The word was not command, but plea, laced with the melancholy of one who had commanded too long. Outside, the enforcers' voices sliced the fog, Garrick's bellow, raw with fury, directing the hunt like a warlord denied his kill. Hounds bayed, their howls twisting through the reeds, a chorus that vibrated in Mireya's chest like an accusation. She pressed a hand to the tree's rough hide, feeling the pulse of sap beneath, sluggish but alive. Where her fingers lingered, the moss brightened faintly, a subtle verdancy pushing back the rot. She withdrew, heart clenching. Not now, not this illusion born of desperation. The night deepened, the moon's silver filtering through the canopy and fractured beams, illuminating the hollow's floor where puddles reflected eyes like shattered mirrors. Kyle eased back, scanning her for wounds, his gaze lingering on the thorn's marks with a flicker of something tender, quickly buried. "The river. It changed because of you," he said, voice low, as if testing the words against the darkness. Guilt shadowed his features, the weight of unspoken thrones pressing down. He had seen too many innocents fed to rituals twisted by greed, his own hands stained from purges that preserved fragile peace. Saving her had been defiance, a crack in the armor of duty, but the pull toward her, instinctive, undeniable, stirred the old melancholy, reminding him of losses that no crown could mend. Mireya shook her head, the lotus petal from the river still tangled in her hair, its white edges glowing faintly under the lunar light. It was her symbol now, fragile yet unyielding, a whisper from the goddess amid the decay. "No, it was your touch. I'm barren, cursed. Everyone knows." The words tasted bitter, the council's brand burning anew on her wrist, thorns vivid in the dimness. Yet as she met his eyes, storm-gray and searching, curiosity pierced the fear. His aura hummed with restrained power, ethical to his core, marked by choices that haunted like distant weavos. She sensed it, the duty that chained him, the guilt that mirrored her rejection. Empathy bloomed, unbidden, softening the edges of her terror into something warmer, a bridge across the chasm of their brokenness. A twig snapped beyond the hollow, and Kyle tensed, drawing his blade with a whisper of steel on leather. The hilt's crescents caught the moonlight, ancient and regal, betraying the disguise. Enforcers crashed closer, their lanterns swinging like pendulums of judgment, casting erratic shadows that clawed at the entrance. Garrick's voice boomed, "The Omega taints us all. Find the intruder who defies the right." Mireya's breath hitched, the common enemy forging an alliance in the instant. She grabbed a fallen branch, its weight unfamiliar in her healer's hands, but resolve steadied her. no longer fleeing alone. They would stand as one against the tide. Kyle nodded, a silent pact, and they moved as shadows within the tree's embrace. He lunged first when the lead enforcer breached the hollow, blade flashing in an arc that disarmed rather than killed, ethical even in fury, sparing a life where he could. The beta crumpled, surprise widening his eyes, but Mireia was there, her touch on his temple instinctive, channeling a healer's calm that dulled the pain without words. The man stilled, confusion flickering before he slumped into unconsciousness. Kyle glanced at her, wonder cracking his melancholy facade. You eased him. She swallowed, the act stirring something deeper, the empathy transforming into a bond that hummed between them like the river's newborn clarity. Fear receded further, curiosity yielding to trust, fragile as the lotus, but growing. They dispatched the next with shared precision, his strength guarding her flank, her intuition guiding the strikes to subdue, not slaughter. Blood scented the air, red against the gray bark, but it was not mindless. It was protection, mutual and raw, the swamp's rot held at bay by their union. As the last lantern faded into the mist, the hound's howls distant now, they collapsed against the roots, breaths mingling in the hush. The wind sighed through the cypress, carrying the faint, fresh scent of clarified water from afar. Mireia's hand brushed Kyle's, accidental yet electric, the thorns on her wrist warming under his proximity. He did not pull away, his gaze holding hers, the guilt softening into quiet revelation. "We're bound by this night," he whispered, voice gravel rough with the weight of it. "Not as savior and saved, but as survivors." She nodded, the bond settling like moonlight on snow, resisted no longer, accepted in the refuge they had carved from chaos. The lotus in her hair caught a beam, petals unfurling wider, symbol of the Renacimento stirring within. Outside, the swamp slumbered uneasily, but here, in the hollow's heart, empathy had woven them tighter, a thread against the coming storm. What was strength, if not choosing alliance amid the shadows? The moon bore witness, its light a promise of revelations yet to unfold. The mist clung to the hollow like a shroud woven from forgotten regrets, its tendrils curling around the cypress roots where Mireia and Kyle had taken shelter. Dawn's first pallor bled through the canopy, turning the swamp's grays to muted silvers, but the air remained heavy, laced with the metallic bite of blood from their skirmish and the underlying rot that refused to fully yield. Mireia's body ached, each bruise a map of the night's fury, yet the lotus petal in her hair held its fragile bloom, untouched by the violence, a silent sentinel against the decay. She sat with her back to the bark, knees drawn close, watching Kyle as he bound a gash on his forearm with strips torn from his cloak. His movements were precise, economical, but the melancholy in his eyes betrayed the toll. Not just the wound, but the ghosts it stirred, echoes of battles where mercy had been a luxury he could ill afford. Her empathy stirred unbidden, a quiet current beneath her skin, sensing the fractures in him, guilt like thorns mirroring her own tattoo, duty's weight bowing his shoulders. The bond they had forged in the refuge pulsed faintly, no longer resisted but examined warily, like a flame too bright to trust. Curiosity had deepened into something sharper, a need to understand why his presence unraveled the swamp's curse around her. She traced the thorns on her wrist, the ink warm now, almost alive, as if the river's touch had awakened it. "That enforcer, when I touched him," she murmured, her voice a thread in the hush. "It wasn't just calm I gave, the rot in his veins. I felt it retreat." The words hung, testing the air, her heart clenching at the vulnerability. Barren Omega, healer's hands, always on the edge of the pack's scorn. To claim more felt like inviting the river back. Kale paused, his storm-gray eyes lifting to hers, the blade he used for binding glinting in the weak light. He had felt it too, in the hollow's frenzy, her touch not just soothing but transformative, the beta's labored breaths evening as the blight's shadow lifted from his flesh. Ethical to his core. He had spared lives where kings often spilled blood, but this, her gift, stirred a deeper reckoning. His throne in the northern realms was built on fragile alliances, haunted by a curse that withered his own lands. Soils turning to ash under endless winters, packs fracturing under famine's blade. Whispers of a lunar lineage, a pathfinder Omega who could mend the broken earth, had drawn him south in disguise. Yet here she was, branded useless, her power veiled by the swamp's lies. Guilt twisted in him, sharp as the wound he sealed. He had come to root out corruption, not to find redemption in a gaze that saw through his masks. Before he could speak, the ground trembled, a low rumble rising from the mire as if the swamp itself protested their intrusion. Vines slithered across the hollow's floor, thicker now, coiling like serpents roused from slumber, their tips black with venomous sap. The air thickened, sulfur choking the freshness they had briefly claimed, and distant weavos pierced the dawn. Not hounds, but something wilder, summoned by the council's desperate rites. Garrick's betrayal ran deeper than greed. The elders had bartered with shadow spirits, twisting the river's rot into a weapon to guard their hoarded power. Mireya's breath caught, fear coiling anew, but beneath it, her empathy flared. A vision flickering at the edges of her mind. The swamp's heart, a poisoned nexus pulsing with stolen lunar essence, feeding on the pack's lifeblood. She rose instinctively, hand outstretched, the lotus petal catching a stray beam of light and glowing like captured moonlight. "It's calling to me," she whispered, the words pulled from her depths, her body moving without thought toward the hollow's edge. The vines lunged, wrapping her ankle, the burn immediate, venom searing up her leg like liquid fire. Pain bloomed, visceral and deep, but she did not cry out. Instead, her palm pressed to the earth, thorn's tattoo igniting with an inner silver light. The gift manifested then, raw and unrestrained, a surge of lunar energy, ancient as the blood moon of her birth, flowing from her veins into the soil. The rot recoiled, vines withering to ash, the ground cracking open to reveal clear springs bubbling forth, water pure as the river's reborn flow, washing away the blight in radiant waves. Cale was at her side in an instant, his arm encircling her waist to steady her as the surge ebbed, leaving her trembling. The swamp transformed around them, reeds straightening, their leaves unfurling in verdant defiance, the mist parting to reveal a hidden glade where wilted blooms stirred back to life under the strengthening dawn. He stared, wonder fracturing his melancholy, the pieces of his destiny aligning in her light. She was no barren curse, but the pathfinder of legend, the Omega whose touch could heal cursed lands, purify the thrones tainted by betrayal. His own realm's winter blight, the guilt of packs lost to famine. She was the key, the revelation that could redeem his crown or shatter it if he clung to isolation. "Mireya," he breathed, her name a revelation on his lips, laced with the awe of one who had wandered too long in shadows. The bond deepened, no longer just survival's thread but fate's weave, pulling him toward acceptance of what duty had denied, love as the forge of true power. She met his gaze, the pain in her leg fading under her own healing light, exhaustion mingling with a profound clarity. The lotus petal fell into her palm, its petals fully open now, symbol of the rebirth she had always carried within, hidden by rejection's veil. Tears traced her cheeks, hot against the chill, but they were not despair's. They were release, the weight of useless, dissolving like mist before the sun. Yet doubt lingered, rationalized. Was this gift a blessing or a chain, drawing her into wars beyond the swamp? The weavos grew closer, the council's shadows encroaching, But in his eyes, she saw the choice mirroring her own, throne or heart, power or compassion. The glade's waters lapped at their feet, clear and inviting, a mirror to the moon's distant watch. What was destiny, if not the courage to claim the light within the rot? Kale's hand covered hers over the lotus, their touches igniting faint sparks, the air humming with unspoken vows. The revelation bound them tighter, her gift the bridge to his fractured world. But the storm of confrontation loomed, demanding they face the past's judgment together. Subscribe if you believe mercy can crown even the fallen. Comment Luna if you'd walk through the storm for someone who saw the glade's newborn clarity shattered like fragile ice under the council's advancing fury, their torches carving bloody gashes through the mist as dawn yielded to a storm-swept noon. Mireia stood at the water's edge, the lotus petal cradled in her palm, its petals now veined with silver threads that pulsed in time with her quickening heart. The revelation of her gift lingered in her veins like liquid moonlight, a power she could no longer deny, yet it chained her heavier than the vines of old. Kyle's presence beside her was a steady flame against the encroaching chill, his hand brushing hers in silent solidarity. But the bond they shared twisted now with foreboding, the weight of his unspoken throne pressing against her empathy, revealing fractures of a kingdom rotting from within, much like the swamp. The Uivos crested into a roar as the pack emerged from the tree line, enforcers flanking Lord Garrick, whose frame loomed larger in the gray light, his fur cloak matted with dew and malice. Elder Thorn trailed him, chalice reforged in his grip, its lunar etchings gleaming mockingly. But it was the figure at Garrick's side that clawed at Mireia's soul, a rival alpha from the shadowed fringes, Victor, whose eyes burned with opportunistic hunger. Tall and scarred, his pelt marked by battles won through betrayal, he had long whispered poisons into the council's ears, trading pack secrets for scraps of power. The traitor, her instincts screamed, the one who had twisted her Barren label into a weapon, accusing her of tainting the bloodline to mask his own embezzlements of sacred herbs, resources hoarded while the swamp devoured the weak. Garrick halted at the glade's threshold, his breath heaving like bellows, the air thickening with the metallic tang of drawn steel and the acrid bite of ritual smoke from braziers they carried. "The curse returns," he snarled, his voice a thunderclap that scattered birds from the reeds. "This Omega's sorcery defies the goddess, sees her, and the intruder who aids her blasphemy." The pack surged, betas and omegas alike caught in the tide of fear, their faces twisted by the lies fed to them. Mireia as harbinger of deeper rot, her survival a sign of demonic pacts. Victor's lips curled in a predator's smile, his gaze raking over her with possessive greed, sensing the power she now embodied, the pathfinder who could purify lands and elevate his ambitions to a crown. Mireia's chest tightened, the lotus warming against her skin as if urging her forward. Fear coiled, visceral as the venom that had burned her earlier, but beneath it surged a moral tempest. Forgive the pack that had cast her into oblivion, or unleash the gift that could war against their corruption? Freedom whispered of flight into the wilds, leaving the swamp to its self-made grave. Love, in the form of Kale's quiet resolve, demanded she stand, redeeming not just herself, but the broken souls ensnared by deceit. Her empathy flared, tasting the pack's hidden pains, the beta's quiet despair, the omega's muffled griefs mirroring her own rejection. What was strength, if not choosing compassion amid the blade's edge? Kyle stepped before her, his blade drawn, the royal crescents on its hilt catching the fractured sunlight like accusations unveiled. No longer disguised, his alpha aura unfurled fully now, commanding and melancholic, laced with the pine-sharp scent of northern winds. Guilt etched deeper into his features, the weight of his throne, a realm of eternal frost where famine clawed at his people's bones, colliding with this southern reckoning. He had come to purge the council's rot, but confronting it meant exposing his identity, risking alliances that could topple kingdoms. "Stand down," he commanded, voice resonant as a distant howl, carrying the ethical steel of a king who had spared more lives than he had taken. "The true treason festers in your rights, Garrick. The river's clarity exposes your greed, tithes siphoned, lands poisoned for profit." The pack faltered, murmurs rippling like wind through dry leaves, but Victor lunged, his claws extended, a blur of feral ambition aiming to claim Mireia as his trophy. "The king meddles in our mire," he spat, circling with predatory grace, his betrayal laid bare in the glee of his eyes. "Cael Draven, fallen sovereign of barren thrones, your curse ends here, with her blood on my fangs." The attack ignited chaos. Enforcers clashed against Kyle's defensive strikes, steel singing against steel, sparks flaring like fireflies in the mist. Blood scented the air, red blooms staining the purified waters, each drop a visceral echo of the river's former rot. Mireia moved without thought, her gift igniting as she wove through the fray, hands outstretched to the wounded, a beta's gashed arm mending under her touch, the rot fleeing his veins like shadows before flame. But Victor cornered her against a cypress, his breath hot and foul, claws grazing her throat. "You'll heal my empire, Pathfinder, or die as the useless wretch they named you." Rage and sorrow warred in her. He was the architect of her exile, the whisperer of her shame. Forgiveness tempted as a blade's mercy, sparing the pack further fracture. War, through her power, could purge the traitor but chain her to endless conflict. Cael roared, barreling into Victor, their bodies colliding in a tangle of muscle and fury. Fists and fangs met, blood spraying in arcs that caught the light like crimson rain, the ground trembling under their struggle. Mireia's empathy bridged them, sensing Kyle's dilemma. Love for her pulling against the duty to reclaim his throne untainted, freedom from guilt's chains versus the war that might consume them both. Victor gained the upper hand, pinning Kyle, but Mireia pressed her palm to the traitor's back, the lotus's light surging through her. Not to kill, but to reveal. Visions flooded him, his own deceptions mirrored back, the pack's suffering laid at his feet. Victor recoiled, howling in anguish, the moral weight crumpling him to his knees, broken not by force, but by truth's unyielding gaze. The pack stilled, Garrick's weapon lowering as the glade's purity spread, vines retreating, waters lapping clear against the banks. Mireia knelt beside Cael, her hands healing his wounds, tears tracing paths through the grime on her face. The choice crystallized. Forgiveness for the misled pack, weaving her gift into their redemption, meant binding her life to Cael's shadowed crown. Love as sacrifice, not liberty's wild call. War averted, but at what cost to her soul? He cupped her face, eyes stormy with shared torment. The bond a fire that warmed the encroaching dusk. "You've given them mercy," he whispered, voice raw. "But what of us?" She pressed the lotus to his chest, its petals wilting slightly, symbol of the rebirth now teetering on war's brink. The moon rose early, blood-tinged, watching as the pack murmured oaths of fealty, traitors exposed. Yet in her heart, the ethical storm raged. Compassion's crown or freedom's exile? The air hummed with unspoken blood, the swamp's breath holding its fury, waiting for the scales to tip. The blood moon hung low over the glade, its crimson veil bleeding into the waters that now lapped clear and insistent at the roots, as if the swamp itself sought absolution in their union. Mireia knelt in the muddied earth, her hands still trembling from the surge of light that had felled Victor. The traitor's form slumped like a discarded shadow amid the reeds. The pack encircled them, a ragged circle of lowered heads and hesitant breaths, the air thick with the scent of rain-kissed stone and the fading copper of spilled blood. Garrick's shoulders sagged, his chalice abandoned in the shallows. The elder's once iron gaze fractured by the revelations her touch had unearthed, truths of embezzled rights, shadowed pacts with spirits that had twisted the river's rot into their arsenal. Whispers rippled through the betas and omegas, not of fear now, but of dawning awe, their eyes tracing the silver veins on the lotus petal clutched in her fist, its glow a beacon against the encroaching dusk. Yet victory tasted of ash in Mireya's mouth, the ethical storm within her raging fiercer than the winds that whipped the mist into frenzy. Compassion had crowned the fallen, Victor's howls of remorse echoing into silence, the pack's chains of deceit loosening like vines severed by dawn. But at what sacrifice? Her gift, once a hidden ember in the healer's hut, now burned exposed, demanding she weave it into the fabric of this fractured world. Freedom beckoned from the wild fringes beyond the swamp, a solitary path where rejection's thorns could heal in isolation. Her womb's barren lie no longer a brand, but a quiet truth. But Kale's hand on her shoulder anchored her, his touch a current that stirred the bond deeper, pulling her toward union's forge. Love as the ultimate redemption, not for thrones or pacts, but for the souls they had both buried under duty's weight. He rose slowly, drawing her with him, his storm-gray eyes reflecting the moon's bloody hue, etched with the melancholy of a king who had glimpsed salvation only to weigh its cost. The wound on his side, sealed by her earlier light, throbbed faintly, a reminder of the war averted yet not erased. His realm to the north called through his veins, eternal frosts claiming lives, soils crumbling to dust under a curse that mirrored this swamp's blight, guilt's relentless tide drowning his nights in weavos of the lost. She was the pathfinder, the lunar air whose essence could mend it all, purifying the thrones tainted by betrayal. But to claim her meant binding her light to his shadow, sacrificing her liberty for a crown that might shatter under love's unyielding proof. "Mireya," he murmured, voice gravel rough against the wind's howl. "The pack bends now, but the shadows linger. Your gift. It could heal my lands, end the famine that haunts my blood. Yet I see the war in your eyes, not with them, but within." She turned to him, the lotus pressing into her palm until its edges bruised her skin, petals wilting under the pressure of choice. Empathy flooded her, tasting his fractures. The ethical king who had purged rivals with mercy's blade, only to inherit their ghosts. The alpha marked by solitude, his heart a fortress cracked by her survival's miracle. The river's clarity sang in the distance, a low hum that vibrated through the earth, symbol of the renascimento stirring between them, rot yielding to life, rejection birthing destiny. But love was no gentle thaw. It demanded she choose, pour her essence into his frozen kingdom, curing the blight at the cost of her wild heart, or walk away, leaving him to his guilt's eternal winter, her freedom a solitary bloom in uncharted wilds. The pack stirred, omegas stepping forward with tentative hands, offering cloaks sodden with mist but warm with newfound fealty. A young beta, the one whose fever had sparked her accusation, knelt at her feet, his eyes wide with the memory of her healing touch. "Pathfinder," he whispered, the title a prayer on his lips. "Purify us as you did the waters." Their pleas clawed at her, echoes of her own hidden pains, the years of silent mending amid scorn. Forgiveness had spared them war, but union with Kale meant weaving her light into their tapestry, a sacrifice that could redeem the entire northern expanse, packs united under compassion's banner. Yet doubt coiled like the old vines. Was this destiny's revelation, or a gilded cage, her womb's truth forever secondary to the power they now craved? Kale's fingers traced her tattoo, the thorns igniting faintly under his warmth, no longer a curse, but a map to shared rebirth. "I came as a shadow to root out their rot," he confessed, his breath mingling with hers in the chill air, pine and blood weaving into her scent of earth and moonlight. "But you've shown me the true purge. If you choose my side, it is not as queen or prize, but as equal in the flame. Or go, and I will guard your path from afar, Love as witness, not chain. His words hung, visceral as the distant thunder rolling over the mountains, the moon's crimson light fracturing on the glade's waters like spilled heart's blood. Mireya's chest tightened, tears carving hot paths through the grime, the wind carrying uivos from the horizon, wild calls of spirits roused by the shifting tides, affirming the spiritual crossroads. Strength was Mercy's choice, she knew, but here it fractured into sacrifice. Heal his realm and bind their souls in eternal proof, or embrace liberty's exile, letting redemption flicker untended. The lotus crumbled in her grasp, its silver dust scattering on the breeze like stars falling to earth, symbol of the Renascimento teetering on her breath. She stepped closer, her hand finding his chest, feeling the thunder of his heart mirror her own. A union not of impulse, but of deliberate fire, born from pain's deepest forge. As the pack watched, breaths held in the hush, she whispered against his lips, "We heal together, or not at all." The choice sealed, light surged from her once more, not in isolation but shared, tendrils of lunar essence weaving into him, easing the guilt's thorns from his aura. The glade bloomed wider, flowers unfurling in the bloody moonlight, the swamp's breath turning fresh as northern winds. Yet even in this union's dawn, a shadow lingered, the sacrifice's price, her freedom's quiet ache amid the crown's embrace. Kyle pulled her close, their foreheads touching, the bond a living flame against the coming trials. What was rebirth, if not choosing love's wound over solitude's frost? The moon wept crimson tears, bearing witness to their vow, as distant howls heralded a new era's fragile light. The crimson moon's descent painted the glade in strokes of fading fire, its light pooling in the clear waters like the last breaths of a dying star. Mireya stood entwined with Kyle, their bodies a fragile bastion against the wind's mournful sigh, carrying the distant uivos of spirits settling into uneasy peace. The lotus's silver dust lingered on her skin, a faint shimmer tracing her arms like veins of forgotten moonlight, marking the threshold she had crossed. Union had been her choice, not as surrender, but as the deliberate strike of a healer's blade, severing the isolation that had choked her for years. Yet even now, as his warmth seeped into her chilled frame, the sacrifice gnawed at her core. Freedom's wild whisper silenced for the forge of shared redemption, her gift no longer solitary, but bound to his shadowed throne. The pack encircled them closer, their forms emerging from the mist like ghosts reclaiming form. Betas, with eyes downcast in shame, Omegas extending tentative hands, their scents mingling with the fresh earthiness rising from the purified soil. Garrick knelt first, his massive frame folding in the mud, the chalice's absence a void in his grasp that spoke louder than oaths. "Pathfinder," he rasped, voice cracked by the weight of unveiled rot. "We were blind to the goddess's weave, your light. It mends what our greed shattered." Victor lay bound nearby, his howls reduced to whimpers. The traitor's fire dimmed by the visions she had forced upon him, mirrors of his betrayals reflecting back the pack's stolen futures, herbs hoarded while children withered in the blight. Mercy had spared his life, but the ethical wound festered, a spiritual scar that would either redeem or consume him. Mireya's empathy pulsed outward, tasting their collective fractures. The Omega's muffled griefs echoing her rejection, the Alpha's buried guilts mirroring Kale's melancholy. She extended a hand to the nearest Beta, the young one from before, his fever-scarred skin warming under her touch as the last tendrils of rot dissolved, leaving his veins clear as the river's reborn flow. A soft gasp escaped him, followed by tears that carved clean paths through the grime. The act rippled through the circle, her light weaving like threads of silver silk, mending gashes from the fray, easing the chronic aches born of the swamp's poison. The air hummed with it, batimentos sinking in the hush, the wind carrying the scent of blooming night jasmine where only thorns had grown. But each surge drained her, a visceral pull from her depths. The barren wombs lie transforming into a well of lunar essence that demanded she give without end. Kale's arm tightened around her waist, his breath ragged against her temple, pine and blood weaving into her senses like an anchor in the tide. He had felt the shift in her, the sacrifice etching deeper, her freedom's ache blooming like the wilted lotus's echo in her chest. His own realm haunted him still, northern mountains cloaked in eternal frost, where famine's blade had claimed packs under his watch, guilt's thorns as unyielding as her tattoo. "Enough," he murmured, voice a low rumble that vibrated through her bones, ethical restraint guiding his hand to still hers. "You've given them the dawn. Now, let it heal you." Yet she saw the war in his eyes, the choice he mirrored. Bind her fully to his crown, curing the blight that withered his lands, or release her to the wilds, love as a distant flame rather than the pyre of union. She pulled back slightly, meeting his storm-gray gaze, the thorns on her wrist igniting under his proximity, no longer a brand of shame, but a map of their intertwined fates. The moon's blood had cooled to silver, illuminating the glade's transformation. Reeds standing tall, their leaves whispering secrets to the stars, the waters reflecting a canopy alive with fireflies that danced like liberated souls. Destiny had revealed itself not as chain, but as revelation, her gift the key to Renascimento for realms beyond the swamp. But love's proof demanded more, the ultimate sacrifice, pouring her essence northward to thaw the frost, at the cost of roots she might never reclaim. Freedom tempted, a solitary path through uncharted forests, her healer's hands unbound by thrones or packs. Compassion urged the union, redeeming his guilt through shared cure, their bond the fire that would light the way. The pack's murmurs swelled into a choral vow, hands raised in fealty, the air thick with the scent of wet stone and nascent hope. An Omega elder stepped forward, her eyes like shadowed pools mirroring Mireya's own, offering a cloak embroidered with lunar crescents, woven from the first pure fibers the glade had yielded. "Join us as kin," she said, voice soft as falling petals, "or guide us from afar. Your choice crowns us all." The words struck deep, stirring the ethical dilemma: power through isolation or compassion's war against despair. Mireya's heart thundered, the wind howling a final challenge from the mountains, uivos blending with the river's distant song. A clear, insistent call to rebirth. She turned to Kale, her fingers tracing the scars on his chest, feeling the thunder beneath, a mirror to her own. "The rot took enough," she whispered, voice steady amid the storm within. "We'll cure it together, not for crowns, but for the light we both lost." The choice sealed in that breath, her light surged once more, not in isolation, but fused with his strength, tendrils extending northward through the ether, visions flickering, frozen soils cracking to reveal green shoots, packs gathering under thaws born of lunar grace. Pain lanced through her, visceral as birthing stars, the sacrifice carving hollows in her soul, freedom's quiet death for love's enduring wound. Kale's arms enveloped her, his melancholy fracturing into quiet awe, guilt's thorns easing as the bond deepened, a spiritual union that transcended hierarchies. The glade bloomed fully then, flowers unfurling in crimson and silver under the moon's watchful eye, the swamp's breath turning to a gentle zephyr scented with pine from distant peaks. The pack knelt as one, their uivos rising in harmony, a chorus of redemption, not conquest. Yet in Mireya's embrace of Kale, the dilemma lingered, a spiritual echo, rebirth through sacrifice, love as the eternal proof that mended what rejection had torn. The river sang clearer, bearing witness to their vow as the first stars pierced the veil, heralding an era where Omegas rose not in silence, but in the fire of chosen fates. What was strength, if not embracing the wound that healed all. If your heart beat alongside ours, like, comment, and subscribe, because every soul that joins our moon keeps the flame of redemption alive.